A little anecdote here. I actually, when we were planning this episode, Tandy you had a pre-reaction before I didn't even like explain everything just yet. I was like, oh, hold that reaction because that is juicy and we need that on camera. So the good way. This is the content today. Um, I was married at 22 years old, about a decade ago at this point, and now divorced. Obviously, right? Not obviously. I'm divorced. Well, I'm divorced. I guess because I said I was married, so like anyway, divorced now. And while I was married, 22, I think part of my particular spouse picking me was someone that they felt like they could mold because of the age range. One, um, and in that, they used to call me the good wife. And my brother-in-laws used to introduce me to people as their wife. So many things wrong with this.
Pardon me. No.
Okay. And the struggle that we had towards the end of the marriage was when I stopped being the good wife and stopped being pleasing. Because you can only manage everything in the household for so long before you implode and before you can't sustain things, right? So in the beginning of our marriage, it made sense because I worked from 5:30 to 1. I was off on Fridays. So I was home first. And I always had this like mindset of whoever's home first, whoever can like make the evening easier for each other, like that's what you do. That's just what you see something, you handle it, right? But I quickly had to learn that you do need boundaries and, division of labor and more communication within a marriage. But as soon as I stopped doing all of these things, it became, you don't care about our household. You don't love me. You're not doing the things that you did before because it wasn't fucking sustainable. And you want me to go to this, and you want me to do this, and you want me to look like that, and you want me to, while doing it, it's virtually impossible. And not to mention that I had started a business too during that time. So it was a lot. So react. You have a lot. You've been holding this since Thursday of this or Wednesday of this week.
Well, I mean, how do I even nutshell it? I just go, hello, patriarchal culture. Hello, Eve. I love Eve, by the way. I'm not throwing shade on her. And yet, it's just so, like, let's put females in a box.
Mm-hmm.
You belong to him. Not just him, you belong to them.
To them, yes. Everybody's
and,
life.
And I'm giving good faith, knowing full well history, tradition, cultures.
Mm-hmm. It's very different.
And yet, I've subscribed a little bit in my lifetime, that's for sure. But it just, at this stage in my life, I just go, no, absolutely not. On the heels of, just no. That's not equity. That's not partnership. That's Eve's story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the helpmate who's there to help him, who's there to be quiet and pleasing and to serve. And how dare you have thoughts or opinions or feelings or just want to rest. I know your past partner came from a different culture.
Yeah.
So we can maybe talk about that.
Black, but not black, or different. Black. I'm Black American. Sorry, I'm like speaking so fast. I'm Black American, and he was West African.
So there's a lot right there, and
a French influence because that's a whole other level too.
And my other reaction to that was, I am not the good wife. Mm-hmm. I'm not, and in fact, taking a lot, not for my partner taking shade, but for my first marriage for sure, and just in general. And I have friends and clients, so this is like quite the narrative, right? Of like even the best of partners, patriarchy and inequity and people pleasing and servitude is built in.
Yeah.
And when you look at the history of marriage, right, it was ownership.
Yes.
This is why some people don't prescribe to it, and why I throw shade at hyphenated last names because I'm like, y'all, none of those last names belong to you. Those all denote who you belong to and your father's last name and a paper. So, like, do what you need to do, but you need to know that's not feminist because you didn't keep your name. That name was never yours.
Yeah.
So there's this like extended play version of it. I mean, put my hand in front of your face. Version of it that I just am baffled by consistently that it still exists and frustrating.
Yeah. That's why, in particular, after, and I didn't really connect the dots on this of like where I was going with it, but when I got separated, I started going by a different last name that I chose, and I had like a short list of last names. I didn't change it legally or anything, but now everybody calls me by it, which is amazing. But like, it was almost like taking back some of that, and I got a lot of shade from people in my family that were like, "Why wouldn't you take our last name back? I don't want your last name." Like, it doesn't feel like who I am and who I'm moving into, you know?
Yeah. This one's juicy, and I feel like I need notes, but I don't have them right now. That marriage in this culture was property, right?
Yes.
Like you had a dowry. Whoever you got married off to, you came with money or resources.
Exactly.
So it was about ownership,
Yeah.
right? And this is where it's so tricky of how much relationships and marriage has changed and how much it hasn't because it's baked into the culture. So even with the most progressive, loving, empathetic partners that are male, I mean, we're speaking to cisgender heteronormative relationships to be clear right now, that it's still baked into the psyche. This is inherent bias and subconscious programming that the good wife does certain things and shows up in certain ways. And so even clients of mine, like the work that I do is dismantling internalized patriarchy. It's self-evolution work. It's based in the tarot. It's based in the goddesses and when God was a woman. So like it's clear what my narrative is in the space that I hold. And I had a client whose husband was like, what did he say? He said something about like, wow, her husband must, what did he say? It was kind of like, handle a lot. And I was like, yeah, that's I'm not even sure if that was exact. I think I blocked out exactly what was passed along. Like it was so
left field
wrong that I was like, why would you repeat that? Why would you repeat that to me? And a bounce and a progression. My partnership, it took me a while to figure this out, where I was like, oh, we appear cisgender heteronormative to people, but actually it's a very queer relationship that I've always identified as bi, and now that there's better language, I think the language would be pan. Like, I don't care about the vessel, I care about the person and the personality.
Queer relationship in the sense that there's no like gender norm.
Correct.
Just want to clarify.
Yeah, well, and there's dialogue and exploration on my partner part of like how he identifies, like because I think we should all be doing that exploration at different times, right? But I was like, oh, to the outside world, male female, 2 kids, it looks slightly nuclear, and I'm like, but on the inside we don't prescribe to gender norms. It's always been who has bandwidth and time, who can handle this. He raised his first son quite substantially, significantly more time like on his own before I came into the picture, and we still bump up against it, don't worry, but I've never been the good wife, and but got comments from other people about, oh, he must let her get away with a lot, and I was like, excuse me,
let me get away with anything.
He must hate me. I mean, I was like, I can't believe you just repeated that to me. Or I thought it was cute to repeat it because I got questions about your relationship.
That part.
But as a tag to the last episode, I'm too much for most people. You must let her get away with a lot in order to be married to that. Because I'm not a good wife. Like, I'm not subservient. I'm not quiet. I'm never going to be quiet for someone else's comfort. And I'm a human. This is an equitable household. Like, we have children to raise together. The whole like, he's babysitting. Like, no, he has right.
It would have happened.
I mean, that's some bullshit.
Yeah. Makes my ass itch. Like, babysitting my kids this weekend. Shut the fuck up. No, you're not. You're raising.
You're being a parent is what you're doing.
Yeah.
That phrase has literally never been uttered in
That just triggers me. um, yeah.
So
I think
yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I think we need to like
Mhm.
shift what good looks like
I
in
love
marriage
Yep. That's
because I think we should all be in service of one another.
agreed.
But it becomes one sided when we're not. Like, I feel like my ideal relationship marriage is where we both strive to outserve one another all the time and consistently. And when we're so focused on meeting each other's needs and anticipating each other's needs, we don't really have time to feel like our needs are not being met because we're actively seeking to figure out how to serve and support that other person. Because I think what happens is in these relationships, and it stems from again, the internalized patriarchy of that everybody can't have it all, right?
Yep.
And if we're going into it, we're so worried about not getting what's ours, right? And I think that's where that some of that starts too, of like, what about me?
Thinking.
Yeah, think.
Because that's I feel like there was like very deep things there, and I'm like, we haven't said that before. I haven't heard you say that. Like, I'm like, okay,
That's
cool,
like
what
my
does that
philosophy.
mean?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's really beautiful. Mine is different, right? Like, I want equity, which is a little, I mean, different language, different of and adamantly intersectional feminist. Like, don't assume because I identify as female or because I'm your wifey that I should. No, we both up against this in our own house. I mean, you're like, well, I'll be honest. Like, I do still feel because of the nature of my schedule and work that when things are going to go south in the schedule, it tends to be me on cleanup duty.
Yeah.
I don't believe that it's because my partner prescribes to that. I do think it is mostly the dynamic of my work schedule that allows for it. However, it's a patriarchal culture.
Yeah.
We all prescribe it. It's like going like, just everybody just say it. We're all racist. Like, because it's a racist culture. It's also a patriarchal culture raised in Christianity viewpoints of Eve as the good wife. And so if we're not fitting into that narrative and story, if we don't appear like that, then we're not the good wife. I'm not. And we're all navigating from that at some level of like, I still want to be a good wife. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I want to be a good partner, but I was raised in the South. I'm from Oklahoma. My parents built the Seventh Day Adventist church. Like, that is fair of like being a good wifey. Like, show up for your kids at all costs. Like,
and I believe even people who are not religious are like, kind of bought into that narrative as well because it has become so like a part of our culture.
Absolutely.
And I want to be clear when I say out-serving one another, it is equity in a way because when I'm saying out-serving, it's about uncovering each other's needs, not what we think the other person needs.
I like that.
Because what you think I need,
we run into this at my house.
not what I actually need. Like it's what you're projecting onto me needing, and so that's where it's like the discovery comes in about your partner. And just because it was like this when we got married doesn't mean that it's the friendship, even partnerships. We have to rework the things. This, as you say, in taking the out of feedback, this used to work for me.
Yeah.
But this doesn't work for me anymore. I've evolved, I've changed,
Yeah.
And I don't feel like in this culture we get the ability to make mistakes or to change or to shift or to have a different viewpoint or to, I used to stand on that hill, but now I wouldn't die on that hill if you paid me.
Totally. And in partnership, that's like the biggest one. I find myself lately reminding myself to go, wait, this is now. That's this. We have a complete, like, our kids are different ages. We live in a different space. Like, life is different. That's not bad. But I have to pause myself actively and go, my expectations of before should not be the expectations of right now because things have evolved. And so when it comes to the good wife, I mean, that's a hot button topic as a culture because we have such massive polarity between, the side, the red and blue right now, and it's just unfortunate. Like, I'm all for women who want to be mothers and caregivers full time, stay at home mamas. It is the hardest job I've ever had, and I gotta say, like, woo, I'm not built for it 100% of this. I mean, I'm always a mother, but it's different.
Let's unpack that a little bit because I'm a woman who, okay, again, two things can be true at the same time, which is what Candy's talking about with the polarity, right? And I find myself like it would be amazing to have children, right? In a setup that still honors me and has a partner that is brought into the dual shared responsibility of raising children. And I'm not willing to give up certain things to make that like to I'm not going to sacrifice myself to have children. Like it's just not going to happen. I worked so hard to get out of that cycle of that marriage and all of the damage that was done. So I'm not going to sacrifice my autonomy and who I am as a human. And I'm not going to be burnt out from raising children. And it's that struggle because I feel like the responsibilities automatically fall to the woman in the relationship when it comes to the rearing of children and not being the fun parent all the time and having to be the bad guy. And I don't want to be the bad guy. Like, I don't want to always be the bad guy. Like, I understand boundaries, guardrails, we need that. But I find myself not just in thinking about child raising, rearing, but also in work spaces, having to also be the bad guy. Like, it's like a,
Oh,
it's a perpetual thing.
So many places to go.
I know.
With it. And I was pointing to myself because I think for so many years, again, we have a very equitable partnership. And I have said multiple times that if for whatever reason this marriage, this partnership doesn't work, I would probably not date men again. Particularly, I know this sounds terrible, but not because I'm like close to it, because one, I have friends and the dating scene. And when I engage with men in the last few years, I literally feel like I can't do it. Like, you are not communicating with me as a human. You have all kinds of thoughts and expectations of how I am to behave. I have been very pointed, like even in business situations or podcast situations, like collaborations, specifically asking me to not speak about certain things, like to curate myself for their benefit.
Yeah, which is just...
It's so problematic that I'm like, I need to be really clear. My partner's awesome, and he is an evolved human who's still evolving, and we still trip up on it.
Oh,
like, even with myself, like, good wifey, what does mothering, good mothering look like? And partnering of, like, expectation and where that comes from and whose job and role it is. It's the good wife is so funny because my original response was like, I'm not a fucking good wife.
Mm-hmm. So when I used to be called the good wife, I loved it.
You did?
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, secretly. But then when I realized, it's all shit, you guys. Like, you have to it's like you have to unpack the shit sometimes, and it's like in that context and in that setting of where I was and like seeking so much approval addiction. Actually, I met up with this woman who is here in Austin, and we've podcasted, like done some episodes together before on previous shows of mine, and we sat down finally face to face after what, that was 2021 and it's 2024 now. We sat down face to face, and as we were talking, I was like, wow, the amount of evolution that you and I have done, and like just even looking at each other, we look like we're like the expressions of who we are growing into and who we're becoming, And so at that time, it felt very good because in that context, I wanted to be like the perfect wife. I had a lot of approval addiction to work through, and I wanted to be praised for taking care of my husband, which I still do when I have a husband again, but not at the sacrifice of being who you are, and not at the sacrifice of staying silent about things, and not at the sacrifice of breaking your back, and being burnt out, because then I'm not serving anybody. No. And I got to a point where my capacity was reached, and now I wasn't helping anyone during that time, and we all imploded, and taking care of ourselves is taking care of a marriage or taking care of a partnership, taking care of a friendship, taking care of work, whatever is taking care of ourselves.
It is. I have a question.
Yes.
So, for clarification today, in this term, the good wife, this is what they, this is how they addressed you. What were their conditions of being a good wife?
So here's the thing. I don't think they know.
Huh.
So,
Really?
Here's the thing. People, okay, no.
Because in my head, I have conditions, and I'm like, I'm not a good wife. I mean, I'm a good wife.
I'll break it into like two parts.
Okay.
I think because, my assumption, but I can't know this to be true because I've never asked. I was never curious, if that makes sense. So my assumption is that my ex-spouse, when we first started dating, and I met his mom, and he said to me, "They don't make women like my mom or like my mom anymore, but you were like her." And in knowing what his mother has been through, in her marriage, that was not a compliment, but I took it as that at the time. Okay. And so, in knowing the ways that she sacrificed herself and showing up, I would assume that it's someone that's all self sacrificing and all consumed with relationship, child rearing, and not really caring into self enough. So, that would be my assumption about what a good wife was.
Okay.
I didn't hear it like that. Like all these things, again, hindsight, all these things, I'm like, oh, when he said that, he was like, "You're gonna be easily abusable and manipulated," but he didn't realize that that's what he was saying. It was a compliment. You know what I'm saying? So it's like all of us questioning the things that we're saying. But when I was 22, I thought that was a high compliment. Oh my god! And I think she's an amazing woman, right? There's some things and aspects about her. However, looking deeper, I was like, that's not what that was. And he didn't realize that that's what he was saying either. It played out in the actions, though.
So instantaneously, my brain, like when we talk about the good wife, I just hear Eve.
Yes.
You are, and again, repeating, no shade on Eve. We can have a very in-depth conversation and a lot of love.
Oh yeah, a lot of love and compassion for her.
Absolutely. And she did eat the fruit. So yay, Eve. However, right, because of her curiosity and her own desires or just curiosity and hey, I want to educate myself. I just want to try this.
Yeah.
We have damned the entire species to hell, earth, school. When I hear good wife, I just hear, oh, you are compliant, you are pleasing, you are quiet, you are background noise. Like you're the pretty, you're the trophy. Like you stand beside me, you let me do everything I need to do.
Yeah.
I get the honor and the glory of having children, a family, and a wifey. And you're going to handle all of that for me so I can go have a career and I can have, respect in community.
Exactly.
And opportunity to propel, yes, for the family. We do a lot of this in our house. Yes, and it is for the family, but it's also for ego and for self. Like it is. Well, it is. I mean, so I just hear good wife and I go, you're compliant, you're easily manipulable.
Oh yeah. I think I was definitely groomed into that.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting when you're like, I don't think they really knew, but that was the moniker.
It was just like lining up all the dots, and I don't think we question enough of the way that we think. Sometimes, especially in the moment of like, we get into like that cycle of like, oh, we're in our everyday life and we're not really like questioning the way that we show up for each other.
Well, and the good wife is, okay, so let's introduce this. This could be a hot mess of like, well, there is no good and bad. Right? No, there's only the value that we place on something. So trying to seek a moniker of good wife is impossible.
Yes.
Some days I'm a good wifey.
Well, and
some days I am not.
If you watched the previous episode to this, we talked about this where we stated, that depending on how somebody is feeling, their reception of you is very subjective. So it's like, it's trying to set this bar that's really never truly reachable, right? Because, like, okay, let me back up because I don't think y'all are ready for this and you're not going to like this, but we're going to go there. So, getting married, and I said this already, but I just have to say it in a different way. Getting married is not all about you, right? Like, I feel like we also, I can't say it enough, have to be in service of each other. And if you get into it thinking it's all about you, it's not going to work. Like, it's going to fail. And that also means not just focusing on your needs. I can't say that enough. Like, I think we need to sit back for a second. Just gonna give that a moment.
Can I open?
No,
Because I can't keep my mouth closed for very long.
no, go for it. That's why it's a podcast.
I also feel like, you know, again, marriage has transitioned and changed so much over time.
Mhm.
People used to marry for resources, right?
Mhm.
And to have kids, so you had somebody work on farm, like to sustain. It was sustainability and functionality. And now we do mostly marry for love. And that's so different, right? But the inherent bias, the cultural programming, the ancestral familial lineage of it is still ever present. And I think the thing that I will offer for myself, because I was married at 23, I was still not a good wife candidate. That was clear on everybody's terms. However, I think...
And that is the marriage that ended.
Yes.
Just to clarify. Okay.
Yes. So, you know, I had that first pancake. So
laughing, but we made it through.
And to be clear, at the time, I really did go into it with the mindset. I knew it wasn't the thing to do. And I also had that mindset of like, well, if it goes south, then we get divorced. That's not a great setup either. I'm not putting accolades on myself for that. But what I want to introduce into that is that when you talk about the good wife and how you liked being called the good wife, that as, I don't know about you, but for me, as a female, I was raised that I was going to be the trophy. Like, my job was to get a man, right? Like, okay, hang on. So there's this, like, if you are a good wife and you become a wife as feminist and independent as you are, there is still the success of having gotten a man and being married, right? So being a good wife is like, I'll be honest, I'm going to tell myself, right, that I really was raised to be a trophy, and that it was clear what the exchange rate of women in the world was. This is hard without trying to over talk it. I did go to school. I do have degrees. I did well in school. I had lots of interest. Yeah. And my mom was clear that at a certain point she was the trophy wife, literally was a trophy wife. And so your exchange rate in the world is like, if you're pretty as a female, you have a high exchange rate of succeeding as somebody's wife. That means you can get a man who has a higher income, right? And so if you're a good wife, then you have scaled your capacity for the ring with their income. Yeah. Does that, you know, so like, so there was a piece of me that like the original marriage, I mean, it was problematic and whatever. It was a relationship that I had for quite a while. And it also felt like, okay, check that off the list. Like I got a ring, I'm a wife. Meanwhile, y'all, I'm gonna throw some shade because there was also this like, you know, property crossover. Like once you have a ring or once you become somebody's wife, like how the dynamic changes or when engagement happens. We were at a party once. This is my first, you know, marriage. We were at a party. I mean, like, I think this is so shady. I actually think looking back, this is a party that I had actually been slipped something and I didn't know it. We'd all been out and it was like early in the morning. We're at somebody's place. Everybody's sitting around, you know, it's a party. And somebody, I was talking to flirting, right, with this other person. And my fiance's friend was right next to me and he leans over, like hardcore. Like, I don't really know him. Like, we don't hang out. Like, we're not friends. He leans over and I was like, I don't know you like that. Please don't touch me. And then he goes, because I had my ring on, he goes like this. He holds her hand up. To show me the ring. Yeah. And like forcibly. Sorry, I was forcible on you. And I was like, what? And he goes, you're engaged. I said, yeah. And he goes, you shouldn't be talking to this person. I was like, we are in a room full of people. Everybody's either high or drunk here right now. Most are 20s. Like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I said, he doesn't own me. And he goes, well, you're his fiance. And I said, and I paid for this ring. So what, do you know what I mean? Like, he was like, you're not allowed to talk to people. You're not allowed. I mean, we were sitting side by side, simply talking. Yes, it was flirting. It was loud, but it was also a party.
Mm-hmm.
But his friend felt it was okay for him as a male to tell me my lane and where I belonged and what I could and couldn't do because I was wearing a ring now. And I was like, well, number one, I paid for that ring.
Yeah.
You got reaction to that one? Telling myself.
No, I understand. It's interesting. My dynamic changed even more when I got a ring, where people were hitting on me way more. Like,
really?
I already got hit on a lot, but it was like escalated. And I think there's something to the ring, the status symbol.
Oh.
People think that, oh, she got a ring, she must be doing something
right
or something.
Yeah.
It must be a catch or something. Let me see if it's serious and shit. Like, you know how people are. It's interesting you said how you were raised. I get a lot of mixed messaging about male female relationships, and I think maybe that's because I was raised by a lot. Well, before my mom passed, it was my mom and my stepdad, my sister and I. And then after my mom passed, it was mostly women in my family that I was around and surrounded by. And I got a lot of mixed messaging about y'all need no man, like,
Yeah.
but then also of like how we react and behave around men,
Yep.
being contrary to that statement. So I got a lot of interesting mixed messaging about relationships. So by the time I got married, I'm still figuring out that stuff for me,
It's interesting, and to be fair to the full dynamic, being because that first marriage was in my early 20s. That, and I'd been with him for 3 years before we got married.
Yeah.
That the narrative did change. I mean, well, to be fair, it was also a confused narrative. It was clear what my value in the world was as a female. I mean, that part was clear. But because the dynamic between my parents literally was epic, maybe someday we'll do an episode because it was quite significant and drama and like weird and big and public. And that my mom's narrative did shift, right? As to like, don't ever fucking get married. Don't let any man steal your life. So it just like, it was like, you're right. So then you're like, what the hell do I do with that?
Hilarious. So much, but like, it's like, and it's like, I guess learning, and that's the hard thing. Like, now we get it of like, that was your trauma and your bullshit, and you're trying to put it on me, and that's your relationship, but it still affects you because our DNA and our livelihood is commingled, our family.
Well, there's some discussion about where those sentiments were coming from. I mean, my mother was also like, don't ever have children. It's the worst thing you'll ever do.
My grandma says that. 3 rules I can give you, Thea. Don't have children, don't have children, don't have children. That's her 3 pieces of advice.
And then doesn't that just make you hate yourself? Like, and
no.
Okay, well.
But like, yes, I get what you mean. I'm just like, so you had a bad
I didn't. Yeah.
I get what you mean.
But like, okay.
It's like, what the fuck? Yeah.
Well, my mom would say that. And then in my brain, I didn't get to say what I needed to say at those points. I was like, well, I'm adopted. You paid for me. Like, you chose and paid money. That's on you. So, like, that was not.
You having buyer's remorse?
Probably because, well, let's unpack that for a second.
I'm saying,
I'm sure she did, because I do feel like my mom treated me like I was a commodified good. This actually would make a great podcast at some point, because I do think that my mom had buyer's remorse. I think she thought it was like a doll. Like, I buy it, it's mine. I get to do with it what I want. I'll dress it the way. I mean, she does have a biological child also.
Okay.
But I do think parenting in general to her, and I do think there was buyer's remorse. Like, there was no thought as to like, oh, this is another human coming from trauma. Like, nobody looks like her, nobody smells like her. Like, that she didn't. My biggest anger point, this is way off topic, is that when I was adopted, there was no thought as to the trauma that comes up because of the adoption. Yeah. And I'm being kind with using that language today. That I do think, earnestly, there was some buyer's remorse with my mom. For sure. And so, everything that she had invested in terms of the good wife, she'd had a first marriage. It didn't go well. Her second marriage was her prize. Yeah. He was wealthy. Like,
She
was
got
on
a
her way.
catch.
She did, and she was the trophy wife that she was conditioned to believe from a very religious background, very patriarchal background. She'd won. She'd done what she was supposed to do, and then it didn't last.
Yeah.
And I do think her anger was completely valid. And I think that all the things that she'd gone through with it, it was like, oh, that's a hard thing to navigate and stay really healthy through. And so I think she had gotten to a point in that relationship that was like, I did everything and everybody told me to do, and I got the things that I was the good wifey. Yeah. And now I'm here by myself, and everything is gone, and everything is imploded. So, like,
it's not the dream I thought it was. It's the American nightmare now. Like, you know,
literally. I mean, literally. So when we talk about like the good wife, it makes me think too, because you mentioned your grandmother. My grandmother, her husband died. He passed. I was 2. She never remarried, never dated, never like one and done. Now, I never heard her say anything disparaging, but I did in my teens start to think, well, wouldn't it just be nice to have a companion of some kind? Like hang out with people? But it was like, nope, I already did that once.
Not doing it again.
And then my auntie, you know, they did not have children. And my uncle's just recently passed. And she gave her whole life to him to be the good wife. Yeah. You know, like it's just very, the scales of like the templates we see, cultural, what's safety, what's security, versus what the experience really is. And then the evolved perspective of now when we say the good wife, I'm like, well, I am not a good wife, nor will I be. Like, I will not be compliant or silent or pleasing. Some days I try.
Yeah.
But I will show up to love a human person, see what their needs are, how I can help. And that is really the value of the relationship I have now. Nobody's ever shown up for me the way that he does.
Amen to that.
But I don't give myself the name good wife.
And I think that's because the reframing hasn't happened around that. And good and bad is like, I don't know. That's a whole nother, I'm not even gonna.
Yeah, I mean, it's just too much because I feel like I've had to come to terms, like in my sphere, it was the trophy wife, was the version of the good wife.
The good wife, yeah.
And I had to do some work around that. Yeah. You know, because that was the expectation in the template. And then you go, oh. And then I'm like, yeah, it's not really what I want. It's not. Exactly. Meanwhile, I am a trophy.
Leo rising, you know, and that I've struggled with that. I actually struggle with that in friendships too. People put me like all the way up here on a pedestal, and then like you really can't make any mistakes, you know. And like I've gone through that so much, and this lesson keeps. Well, it's starting to stop, okay, but it had come up for a while in friendships and relationships, and I was just like, I'm a human, guys. Like, I'm not perfect. I fall off at the handle. I don't always handle things very well. You know, I'm human, and I'm not gonna be perfect because you're not perfect, and we're never going to like get to like a place of ultimate perfection and harmony. If you're not having discord, you're not having a relationship. So there's that.
I'm going to help us land it, maybe. I'm going to try. I'm going to attempt.
We don't really land. We just kind of awkwardly walk right up the door. Like
awkward turtles.
Let's land it, because you see me teetering. Let's land. I don't know why this is so challenging today. It's not like we don't run other podcasts where it's just like, okay, we have a clear end. But this one is just like, we're just going to, okay.
Well, I think, you know, that these terms of good and bad, that these are, they're binaries.
Yes.
Binary is a lie. Some days you're going to be good at things. Some days you're going to be bad at things. Like, we're just looking to be able to be the spectrum of ourselves within a new relationship. And so I feel like when we were talking about the good wife, of like how much we have changed, right? Like, oh, I used to really like that. Until then, I knew what it meant, you know, and then you're like, once I figured out what it meant, I was like, oh, no, thank you.
No, I don't subscribe.
Yeah. And so I think this, I don't know, what I'm going to offer is that any binary is an injustice to both parties, right?
Absolutely.
Because ultimately, your ex didn't get what he wanted, right? Like, you're not together, it didn't work, it went south. And that if when we can release like these prescriptives and just go, what works for me, what works for us in this partnership, how do I show up for that human that I love? Again, what's my bandwidth to show up for this human today in this moment? Do they show up for me? Because what I've learned, and I'm sure you've heard this other places, is in partnership, it's like I think feminism and equity and progress have us still thinking that partnerships are 50-50.
Yeah. And
they never are. What you're looking for is 50-50 in the long game.
Yes.
Because there are times where like one partner gonna carry 90%. It's not fun. We don't like it. It's not intentional. It's just what's happening in that period of time. But we want to make sure that in partnership and equity, the other partner's going to carry their 90 when that time rolls around.
Yes.
And so what I can say is that it's clunky in my relationship. It is, we're human. We don't always agree, but I know long term that he always shows up. And I think I can speak and say he knows I show up. That we're constantly trying to find. I think harmony and balance is like not necessarily teeter-totter, but we still use it because our brains know what to do with the teeter-totter.
Yeah.
I think that he and I are scooching in and out on the teeter-totter all the time. Yeah. Like sometimes we fuck up and we're both on the same side, or we launch the other person off the other side. But there's no 50-50. And I think that when you're trying to be the good wife, that just puts 100% on your plate automatically.
It does.
Yes.
No, 0. If anybody, wants to submit an application. Okay, we'll end it there.
We love you.
Okay, bye.